You think you know how to communicate. You talk every single day. You text. You email. You have conversations with friends, family, coworkers. But here's what most people don't realize. Talking is not the same thing as communicating. And the gap between those two things is costing you more than you understand. Right now, in this moment, there are relationships in your life that are strained because of miscommunication. There are opportunities you've missed because you couldn't articulate your value clearly enough. There are conflicts that could have been avoided if you'd known how to express yourself differently. And there are people who have completely misunderstood who you are simply because the message you thought you were sending wasn't the one they received. Communication isn't just about making yourself heard, it's about making yourself understood. And there's a world of difference between those two concepts. Most people go through life believing they're decent communicators, simply because they can form sentences and engage in basic conversation. But when you look at the research, when you examine what actually makes communication effective, you realize that the majority of us are operating at a fraction of our potential. We're like someone trying to drive a car with one hand tied behind their back, wondering why we're not getting where we want to go. The truth is, communication skills are not something you're born with or without. They're not a talent reserved for the naturally charismatic or the professionally trained. They're a learnable set of techniques, habits, and awareness practices that anyone can develop. And when you do develop them, when you actually understand how to communicate effectively, everything in your life begins to shift. Your relationships deepen because people finally feel heard and understood by you. Your career accelerates because you can articulate your ideas with clarity and conviction. Your conflicts diminish because you know how to navigate disagreement without creating enemies. Your influence expands because people trust you, believe you, and want to follow your lead. But here's the problem. We live in a world that talks constantly, yet communicates poorly. We're surrounded by noise, distraction, and surface-level interaction. We've confused activity with progress, volume with impact, speaking with connecting. And in that confusion, we've lost touch with what communication actually requires. Think about the last disagreement you had with someone close to you. Chances are it wasn't really about what you were arguing over. It was about feeling unheard, misunderstood, or dismissed. It was about the way something was said, the tone that was used, the assumption that was made. Most conflicts aren't about the content at all. They're about the communication surrounding that content. Or think about the last time you tried to explain something important to someone and watched their eyes glaze over. You had valuable information to share, but somehow the message didn't land. They nodded along, maybe even said they understood, but you could tell they didn't really get it. That's not a failure of their intelligence. It's a failure of your communication. The cost of poor communication is staggering. In the workplace alone, studies have consistently shown that miscommunication leads to decreased productivity, increased errors, damaged relationships, and lost opportunities. When teams can't communicate effectively, projects fail. When leaders can't articulate vision clearly, organizations drift. When employees can't express concerns constructively, problems fester until they explode. In personal relationships, the damage runs even deeper. Marriages crumble under the weight of unspoken resentment and misunderstood intentions. Friendships dissolve when one person feels perpetually unheard. Parent-child relationships fracture when neither side knows how to bridge the communication gap. And through it all, people walk around believing the problem is that they just don't get along, when really the problem is that they don't know how to communicate. But here's the good news. Communication is a skill, and like any skill, it can be learned, practiced, and mastered. You don't need years of training or a degree in linguistics. What you need is awareness, intention, and a willingness to examine how you're currently communicating versus how you could be communicating. Over the next several minutes, we're going to break down the essential elements of effective communication. We're going to explore what the research actually tells us about how human beings exchange information, build understanding, and create connection. We're going to look at the techniques that separate mediocre communicators from exceptional ones. And we're going to give you practical, actionable strategies that you can start using immediately. This isn't about becoming someone you're not. It's about becoming more skilled at expressing who you are. It's about learning to convey your thoughts, feelings, and ideas in ways that actually reach people. It's about developing the ability to understand others more deeply and be understood more clearly in return. Communication is the foundation of everything meaningful in your life. Every relationship you value, every goal you pursue, every conflict you navigate, every opportunity you create, it all comes down to how effectively you can communicate. And the beautiful thing is, you're already doing it every day. You're already engaged in the process. All we're doing here is making you better at it. So let's start with the fundamentals. The things most people miss entirely because they're too busy focusing on what to say instead of how to say it. The foundation. Understanding communication beyond words. When most people think about communication, they think about words. They focus on what they're going to say, how they're going to phrase it, what specific language they'll use. And while words certainly matter, they're actually a surprisingly small part of effective communication. Research conducted over decades has consistently demonstrated something that challenges our basic assumptions about how we convey information. The work of Albert Mehrabian, a researcher who pioneered studies in nonverbal communication, found that when we're communicating about feelings and attitudes, only about 7% of our message comes from the actual words we use. 7%. Let that sink in for a moment. According to this research, approximately 38% of our communication comes from vocal elements like tone, inflection, pace, and volume, and a full 55% comes from nonverbal cues such as facial expressions, body language, posture, and gestures. This means that up to 93% of what we communicate has nothing to do with the words coming out of our mouths. Now it's important to understand the context of this research. Mehrabian's findings were specifically about situations where people are communicating feelings and attitudes, particularly when there's incongruence between verbal and nonverbal messages. His work doesn't mean that words are always only 7% of communication. When you're conveying factual information or complex ideas, the content obviously carries more weight. But when it comes to interpersonal communication, emotional exchanges, and relationship dynamics, the nonverbal elements dominate. Think about what this means in practical terms. You can say, "I'm fine" with your words, but if your voice is tight, your arms are crossed, and your face is tense, everyone knows you're not fine. The words become almost irrelevant. Your body is telling the truth that your mouth is trying to hide. Or consider a job interview where you say all the right things about your qualifications and enthusiasm, but you slouch in your chair, avoid eye contact, and fidget constantly. Your verbal message says, "Hire me," but your nonverbal message says, "I'm uncomfortable and unsure." Guess which message the interviewer will remember? This is why so many people struggle with communication even when they think they're saying the right things. They focus all their attention on crafting the perfect message, but they've completely neglected the delivery system. It's like trying to send an important package but not bothering to check if the shipping container is damaged. The reality is that human beings are constantly reading each other, interpreting signals, making judgments based on thousands of tiny cues that we're barely conscious of processing. When someone walks into a room, you form an impression within seconds based entirely on nonverbal information. The way they carry themselves, their facial expression, their energy, all of these elements combine to create an immediate sense of who they are and whether you can trust them. This process happens so quickly and so automatically that we often don't even realize we're doing it. We just get a feeling about someone or sense that something is off. What we're actually doing is reading their nonverbal communication and comparing it against patterns we've learned throughout our lives. Studies examining body language and its impact have revealed fascinating insights into how we perceive and process nonverbal information. Research has shown that people can accurately interpret emotions from body language even when they can't see facial expressions. The way someone holds their shoulders, positions their hands, or shifts their weight all convey information about their emotional state, confidence level, and intentions. In one compelling study, researchers found that when verbal and nonverbal messages contradict each other, people overwhelmingly trust the nonverbal signal. If someone says they're excited about an idea, but their body language shows hesitation or discomfort, observers will believe the body language over the words. This makes sense from an evolutionary perspective. Nonverbal cues are much harder to fake convincingly, so they tend to be more reliable indicators of true feelings and intentions. Processing body language happens largely below the level of conscious awareness. Scientists have discovered that our brains are constantly analyzing nonverbal cues, pattern matching against our stored experiences, and generating intuitions about what we're observing. This is why you can sometimes tell that someone is lying without being able to articulate exactly what gave it away. Your conscious mind hasn't identified the specific signals, but your unconscious processing has picked up on inconsistencies and discrepancies. Understanding this dynamic is crucial for improving your communication. It means you can't just focus on what you're saying, you have to be aware of how you're saying it. Your facial expressions need to match your message. Your posture needs to support your words. Your gestures need to emphasize rather than contradict your point. When there's congruence between verbal and nonverbal communication, meaning everything is aligned and consistent, your message becomes dramatically more powerful. People don't have to work to decode what you mean because all the signals point in the same direction. They can relax, trust what you're saying, and engage with your message rather than trying to figure out what's really going on. But achieving this congruence isn't always easy, especially when you're experiencing one emotion while trying to project another. This is where authentic communication becomes so important. When you're genuinely aligned with what you're expressing, when your words match your feelings, which match your body language, communication becomes almost effortless. People sense that authenticity and respond to it. Think about the most compelling speakers you've encountered, whether in person, on stage, or through media. Chances are what made them compelling wasn't just their words or even their delivery. It was the sense that they believed what they were saying, that their entire being was aligned with their message. Their passion showed in their eyes, their conviction radiated through their posture, their enthusiasm animated their gestures. This kind of authentic, aligned communication creates what researchers call communication coherence. When messages are coherent, processed fluently without mental friction, they're perceived as more familiar, attractive, and true. This is why even well-crafted lies often fail. Creating complete coherence between verbal and nonverbal signals when you don't believe what you're saying requires enormous cognitive effort and control. For most people, the body will leak the truth through micro-expressions, tension patterns, or subtle inconsistencies that others pick up on unconsciously. You might think you're maintaining perfect composure, but your foot is tapping, your jaw is clenched, or your breathing has changed. And while the person you're talking to might not consciously notice these signals, they'll walk away with a feeling that something was off. This is why improving your communication starts with self-awareness. Before you can effectively communicate with others, you need to understand what you're actually communicating right now. You need to notice your habitual patterns, your unconscious signals, your default body language. Do you tend to cross your arms defensively? Do you avoid eye contact when uncomfortable? Do you fidget when nervous? Do you talk faster when anxious? These patterns aren't good or bad in themselves. They're just information. But if you're unaware of them, they're communicating messages you might not intend to send. Someone might interpret your crossed arms as hostility when you're just cold. They might read your lack of eye contact as dishonesty when you're just feeling shy. Your rapid speech might suggest anxiety when you're actually excited. Becoming aware of your communication patterns gives you choice. Instead of operating on autopilot, responding to every situation with your default settings, you can consciously adjust your nonverbal communication to support your intended message. You can notice when your body language contradicts your words and either change your body language or acknowledge the disconnect. This kind of awareness also helps you read others more accurately. When you understand how much information is conveyed nonverbally, you start paying attention to it in others. You notice when someone's words say one thing but their body says another. You pick up on discomfort, enthusiasm, confusion, or engagement that might not be explicitly stated. This makes you a more perceptive communicator, able to adjust your approach based on what you're actually observing rather than what you're assuming. But here's what's crucial to understand. Nonverbal communication is contextual and cultural. A gesture that means one thing in one culture might mean something completely different in another. Prolonged eye contact might be seen as confidence and engagement in one context and as aggression or disrespect in another. Personal space preferences vary dramatically across cultures and individuals. This means that while general principles apply, such as the importance of congruence and alignment, you can't simply memorize a list of what each signal means and expect to communicate effectively everywhere with everyone. You have to develop what's called communication flexibility, the ability to observe, adjust, and adapt your style based on context, culture, and the specific person you're engaging with. The most skilled communicators are like jazz musicians, working from a solid foundation of technique, but improvising based on what they're hearing and feeling in the moment. They're not rigidly following a script. They're responding dynamically to the full range of signals being exchanged in the conversation. This brings us to one of the most critical elements of effective communication, and one that most people completely overlook because they're so focused on what they want to say: the art of truly listening. Active listening, the most overlooked skill. Here's a hard truth that most people need to hear. You're not actually listening to other people. You think you are, but you're not. What you're doing is waiting for your turn to talk, while occasionally catching fragments of what the other person is saying. Real listening, what researchers call active listening, is rare. It's so rare that when someone encounters it, when they actually experience being truly heard by another person, it stands out as a remarkable event. They remember it, they feel grateful for it, they trust the person who did it. And yet, despite how powerful genuine listening is, despite how much it transforms relationships and builds trust, most people never develop this skill. They go through life having surface level conversations, missing the deeper meaning behind what people are saying, and wondering why their relationships lack depth and connection. The problem starts with a fundamental misunderstanding about what listening actually is. Most people think listening is simply hearing the words someone else is saying, but hearing is just the physical process of sound waves hitting your eardrums. Listening is something entirely different. Listening is the active, intentional process of receiving, interpreting, and responding to both the verbal and nonverbal messages being communicated. When you're truly listening, you're not just processing words, you're paying attention to tone, inflection, pace, and volume. You're observing body language, facial expressions, and emotional energy. You're noticing what's being emphasized and what's being avoided. You're tracking the emotional undercurrent beneath the surface content. And you're doing all of this while suspending your own agenda, your own judgments, and your own need to respond. This is incredibly difficult for most people because our brains naturally want to jump ahead. While someone is talking, we're already formulating our response, preparing our counterargument, or relating their experience to something from our own life. We're not present with what they're saying, we're already somewhere else in our own heads. Research on active listening has revealed something fascinating about what happens in our brains when we experience being genuinely heard. Scientists using functional magnetic resonance imaging have found that perceiving active listening activates the reward system in the brain. When people sense that someone is truly listening to them, it literally feels good at a neurological level. The same regions that light up when we experience other forms of reward and pleasure become active when we feel heard and understood. This makes evolutionary sense. Human beings are fundamentally social creatures who rely on connection and cooperation for survival. Being understood by others, having our experiences validated and our perspectives acknowledged, isn't just psychologically pleasant, it's a core human need. When that need is met through genuine listening, our brains respond with a flood of positive reinforcement. But the benefits go far beyond making people feel good. Studies have demonstrated that active listening significantly improves the quality of information exchanged in conversations. When people feel genuinely heard, they share more openly, provide more detailed information, and express themselves more honestly. They don't waste energy wondering if they're being judged or misunderstood. They can focus on clearly articulating what they actually mean. This is why active listening is so crucial in professional contexts like healthcare, counseling, and leadership. Research in medical settings has shown that when doctors practice active listening, patients are more likely to disclose important symptoms, follow treatment recommendations, and report higher satisfaction with their care. The quality of the listening directly impacts the quality of the outcomes. In leadership contexts, the impact is equally dramatic. Studies have found that when employees perceive their leaders as good listeners, they're more likely to speak up with ideas and concerns, more engaged in their work, and more committed to the organization. But here's the critical finding. Just listening isn't enough. Employees are significantly more likely to feel heard when leaders listen and then take action based on what they heard. The combination of listening plus follow-through builds trust and psychological safety in ways that listening alone cannot. So what does active listening actually look like in practice? It involves several distinct techniques that work together to create the experience of being truly heard. First, there's the foundation of full attention. This sounds simple, but in our distraction-saturated world, it's increasingly rare. Full attention means putting down your phone, closing your laptop, turning away from other tasks, and focusing entirely on the person speaking. It means not checking notifications, not planning what you're making for dinner, not thinking about your next meeting. Your mind is present right here, right now, with this person and what they're communicating. This kind of focus is challenging because our attention spans have been eroded by constant digital stimulation. We've trained ourselves to constantly multitask, to always be processing multiple streams of information simultaneously. But you cannot multitask your way to genuine listening. Every time your attention splits, you miss something. A subtle shift in emotion, a meaningful pause, a nonverbal signal that contradicts the words being spoken. Second, active listening involves demonstrating your attention through nonverbal engagement. This means maintaining appropriate eye contact, not staring intensely, which can be intimidating, but making regular, natural eye contact that shows you're focused on the speaker. It means nodding occasionally, to show you're following along. It means leaning slightly forward rather than slouching back, signaling through your posture that you're engaged and interested. Your facial expression should reflect what you're hearing. If someone is sharing something difficult, your face should show empathy and concern. If they're excited about something, your face should reflect genuine interest. This doesn't mean you have to mirror every emotion they express, but your expression should be appropriate and responsive to what they're communicating. Third, active listening requires managing your internal reactions and impulses. When someone says something you disagree with, your immediate instinct might be to interrupt and correct them. When they're describing a problem, you might feel compelled to immediately offer solutions. When they mention an experience, you might want to jump in with a similar story from your own life. Active listening means noticing these impulses and deliberately choosing not to act on them. This doesn't mean you never disagree, never offer help, or never share your own experiences. It means you wait. You let the speaker fully express what they need to express before you respond. You give them the gift of being heard completely, rather than being interrupted or redirected mid-thought. Fourth, active listening involves asking clarifying questions that deepen understanding rather than redirect the conversation. These are questions like, what did that feel like for you? Or can you help me understand what you mean by that? What was most significant about that experience? These questions invite the speaker to go deeper, to explore their own thoughts and feelings more fully, and to help you grasp not just the facts of what they're saying, but the meaning behind those facts. This is distinctly different from interrogation-style questioning, where you're trying to extract specific information or prove a point. Clarifying questions in active listening are genuine requests for understanding. You're not trying to trap the speaker in a contradiction or gather ammunition for your argument. You're trying to see the world from their perspective, to understand their experience as they experienced it. Fifth, active listening includes reflecting and paraphrasing what you've heard to confirm your understanding. This might sound like, so what I'm hearing is that you felt dismissed when that happened. Is that right? Or it sounds like the most frustrating part for you was the lack of communication. Do I have that correct? This technique serves multiple purposes simultaneously. It shows the speaker that you're actively processing what they've said rather than just passively hearing words. It gives them an opportunity to clarify if you've misunderstood something, and it demonstrates that you care enough about understanding them accurately that you're willing to check your interpretation rather than assuming you got it right. When done well, reflecting and paraphrasing can help speakers understand their own thoughts and feelings more clearly. Sometimes hearing their experience summarized and reflected back helps them recognize patterns, make connections, or see things from a new angle. This is why active listening is so powerful in therapeutic contexts. The process of being deeply listened to can itself be healing and clarifying. 6. Active listening requires acknowledging the emotions present in the conversation, not just the content. If someone is telling you about a difficult situation and they're clearly upset, acknowledging their emotion with something like, that sounds really frustrating, or I can hear how much that hurt you, validates their experience in a way that trying to immediately fix the problem never could. Most people, especially those who are solution-oriented or uncomfortable with emotions, skip right over acknowledging feelings and jump straight to problem solving. But here's what research consistently shows. People need to feel heard and understood emotionally before they can effectively engage with solutions. When you rush to fix something before acknowledging the emotional experience, the person feels like you're dismissing their feelings and trying to make your own discomfort go away rather than actually helping them. The challenge with active listening is that it requires genuine curiosity about other people's experiences and perspectives. You can't fake this effectively over time. If you're just going through the motions of active listening techniques while internally judging, planning your response, or waiting for your turn to talk, people will sense the inauthenticity. This is why developing active listening skills often requires a shift in mindset, not just learning techniques. You have to cultivate genuine interest in understanding how other people see the world. You have to become comfortable with silence and not knowing what to say. You have to let go of the need to always have an answer, always be right, or always move the conversation toward your preferred outcome. One of the biggest obstacles to active listening is what researchers call listening blocks, habitual patterns that interfere with genuine listening. Some people rehearse their response while the other person is talking, running through what they want to say next instead of staying present. Others filter what they hear, only paying attention to information that confirms what they already believe and tuning out everything else. Still others immediately shift into a vice mode, focusing on solving the problem rather than understanding the experience. These listening blocks are usually unconscious. Most people aren't aware they're doing them because they've become so habitual. This is why recording yourself in conversation or asking trusted friends for honest feedback about your listening skills can be so valuable. You need external perspective to see your own blind spots. Cultural factors also play a significant role in listening dynamics. Different cultures have different norms around eye contact, appropriate distance, how long to pause before responding, and how directly to communicate. What's considered active listening in one cultural context might be perceived as intrusive or inappropriate in another. This means truly skilled listeners need to be culturally aware and flexible, adapting their approach based on context rather than applying a one size fits all formula. Technology has created new challenges for active listening. When you're communicating via text, email, or even video calls, you lose access to many of the nonverbal cues that provide critical context. Research has found, however, that active listening techniques can translate effectively to digital communication when applied thoughtfully. Things like asking clarifying questions, paraphrasing for understanding, and acknowledging emotions all work in written formats, though they require more explicit articulation since body language isn't available. The power of active listening extends far beyond individual conversations. When organizations and communities develop cultures of active listening, it transforms how information flows, how problems get solved, and how people relate to each other. In workplaces where active listening is valued and practiced, innovation increases because people feel safe sharing unconventional ideas. Conflicts get resolved more effectively because all parties feel heard, and trust deepens because people experience their perspectives being taken seriously. But active listening isn't just about being a better conversationalist or building stronger relationships, though it certainly does both. It's also about gathering better information and making better decisions. When you truly listen to people, you learn things you wouldn't learn otherwise. You discover perspectives you hadn't considered. You understand contexts you were missing. All of this makes you smarter, more informed, and better equipped to navigate complex situations. Think about the last time you had a disagreement with someone. If you're honest with yourself, how much of that conversation did you spend actually listening to understand their perspective versus waiting for your opportunity to make your point? How much mental energy went toward defending your position versus genuinely considering theirs? How much of the conflict could have been avoided or resolved faster if both parties had been practicing active listening? Most conflicts escalate not because the underlying issues are insurmountable, but because neither party feels heard. They keep repeating themselves, getting more frustrated and more entrenched in their positions because they sense that the other person isn't really listening, and they're usually right. Both parties are so focused on being understood that neither is actually trying to understand. Active listening breaks this cycle. When you genuinely listen to someone, even if you ultimately disagree with them, they feel respected and valued. This creates space for productive dialogue rather than defensive argumentation. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything they say or abandon your own perspective. It means you're willing to understand their perspective fully before asserting your own. The neurological research on active listening reveals something else that's important. When people feel heard, their brain's threat response decreases. The amygdala, which activates when we feel under attack or misunderstood, calms down when we experience being genuinely listened to. This is why active listening is so effective at de-escalating tense situations. It literally changes what's happening in people's brains, shifting them from defensive mode to open mode. This has profound implications for difficult conversations, negotiations, and conflict resolution. When you start by deeply listening, you're not just gathering information, you're changing the neurological state of the person you're engaging with. You're making it more likely that they'll be able to hear you when it's your turn to speak because their threat response has been lowered and their capacity for rational processing has increased. One of the most common mistakes people make when learning about active listening is thinking it means you have to agree with everything someone says or never voice your own perspective. This misunderstanding leads some people to reject active listening entirely, viewing it as passive or weak. But active listening isn't about abandoning your own thoughts and feelings. It's about sequencing. You listen first, understand fully, and then respond thoughtfully rather than reactively. When you've genuinely listened to someone, when you've demonstrated that you understand their perspective, they're much more likely to be open to hearing yours. You've built credibility and trust by showing that you take their thoughts seriously. You've also gained crucial information about where they're actually coming from, which allows you to craft a response that addresses their real concerns rather than your assumptions about their concerns. Active listening also helps you avoid one of the most common communication traps, solving the wrong problem. How many times have you offered advice or solutions to someone only to have them respond with frustration? Often this happens because you didn't listen long enough to understand what they actually needed. Maybe they weren't looking for solutions at all. They just needed to vent and feel heard. Maybe the problem you thought you heard wasn't actually the core issue. Maybe your solution addressed the symptom but missed the underlying cause. When you practice active listening, you gather enough information to understand not just what someone is saying on the surface, but what they actually need. Sometimes what they need is advice. Sometimes they need validation. Sometimes they need help problem solving. Sometimes they just need someone to bear witness to their experience. Active listening helps you discern which is which, so you can respond in ways that actually help rather than ways that miss the mark. Developing active listening skills takes practice, and it can feel awkward at first. You might feel like you're being overly formal or that the techniques are unnatural. This is normal. Any new skill feels clunky before it becomes fluid. But with consistent practice, active listening becomes more natural, more automatic, more integrated into your default communication style. Start small. Pick 1 or 2 conversations each day where you commit to practicing active listening fully. Put away all distractions, focus completely on the speaker, and consciously apply the techniques. Notice what happens, both in terms of the quality of the conversation and in terms of how the other person responds. Pay attention to what feels difficult for you. Do you struggle to stay present? Do you find yourself jumping to solutions? Do you have trouble managing your own emotional reactions? Each challenge you notice is an opportunity for growth. The goal isn't perfection, it's progress. Every time you catch yourself starting to interrupt and choose to stay silent instead, you're strengthening your active listening muscles. Every time you resist the urge to immediately relate someone's story to your own experience, and instead ask a clarifying question, you're developing this crucial skill. The beautiful thing about active listening is that it creates a positive feedback loop. When you listen to others genuinely, they feel valued and respected. This typically makes them more willing to listen to you in return. It improves the quality of your relationships, which makes communication easier and more enjoyable. And as people around you experience being truly heard, they often start practicing better listening themselves, creating a ripple effect that can transform entire relationship systems. But here's what you need to understand. Active listening is just one piece of effective communication. It's a crucial piece, arguably the most important piece, but it works in concert with other skills and practices. And one of those practices that most people get terribly wrong is how they craft and deliver their own messages. That's what we need to talk about next. Clarity and conciseness, cutting through the noise. Let me ask you a question. When was the last time you heard someone talking, and within the first few sentences, your mind started to wander? When did you last receive an email that was so long and convoluted that you couldn't figure out what the person actually wanted? When did you most recently sit through a presentation where the speaker talked and talked without ever getting to the point? This happens constantly, and it's one of the most common communication failures people make. They bury their message under layers of unnecessary words, tangential thoughts, and meandering explanations. They confuse talking more with communicating better, and in the process, they lose their audience, waste time, and fail to achieve their communication goals. Effective communication requires 2 fundamental qualities that most people neglect: clarity and conciseness. Clarity means your message is easy to understand, that there's no ambiguity about what you're trying to convey. Conciseness means you're expressing your thoughts using only the words necessary to convey them effectively, without unnecessary padding or filler. These 2 qualities work together. You can be concise but unclear if you leave out essential information. You can be clear but not concise if you take forever to get to your point. The sweet spot is achieving both, saying what needs to be said in a way that's easy to understand, using just enough words to do the job well. Research on workplace communication has consistently found that clarity, conciseness, and consistency are the keys to effective messaging. When communication is clear and concise, it reduces errors, improves efficiency, and enhances understanding. When messages are muddled, verbose, or inconsistent, productivity suffers, misunderstandings multiply, and relationships strain under the weight of confusion and frustration. Think about this from the receiver's perspective. When someone communicates clearly and concisely with you, it's a gift. They've done the hard work of organizing their thoughts, identifying the essential information, and presenting it in a digestible format. You don't have to work to decode what they mean. or wade through paragraphs of filler to find the actual point. You can quickly grasp what they're saying and respond appropriately. But when someone communicates in a rambling, unclear way, they're essentially asking you to do their work for them. You have to sort through the mess they've created, try to identify what's actually important, and hope you're interpreting their meaning correctly. It's exhausting, time-consuming, and often leads to misunderstanding, even when both parties are trying their best. The problem is that most people don't realize they're being unclear or long-winded. In their own minds, everything they're saying seems relevant and necessary. They're following their own train of thought, which makes perfect sense to them, not realizing that their audience doesn't have access to all the context and connections happening inside their heads. This is why one of the most important communication skills you can develop is the ability to step outside your own perspective and consider what your audience actually needs to know. Not everything you know, not everything you think is interesting, but specifically what they need to understand your core message and take whatever action or form, whatever understanding you're hoping to create. Achieving clarity starts before you ever open your mouth or type the first word. It starts with getting clear in your own mind about what you're actually trying to communicate. What is the core message? If you could only say one thing, what would it be? What is the desired outcome of this communication? Most people skip this step entirely. They start talking or writing without having clearly defined what they're trying to achieve. And it shows. Their message wanders. They contradict themselves. They leave out crucial information while including irrelevant details. The lack of internal clarity manifests as external confusion. Professional communicators, the people who make their living through the power of their communication, obsess over this preparation phase. Writers outline, speakers rehearse, business professionals craft key messages before important meetings. They don't wing it and hope for the best. They invest time up front to ensure clarity of thought, which enables clarity of expression. This doesn't mean you need to script out every conversation or draft every text message multiple times. But for important communications, the ones that actually matter for your relationships, your career, or your goals, taking even just a few minutes to clarify your thinking before you communicate can make an enormous difference in how effectively your message lands. Once you're clear on what you want to communicate, the next challenge is organizing that information in a way that makes sense to your audience. This is where many people fail. They organize information in the order they thought of it or discovered it, which may have no logical connection to how someone else would best receive and process it. Research on effective communication structure consistently shows that leading with your main point, then providing supporting details, works better than building up to your conclusion. This might feel counterintuitive if you're used to saving the punchline for the end, but in most communication contexts, people need to know where you're going in order to make sense of the journey. When you start with your core message, you create a framework that helps your audience organize all the subsequent information. They know what to listen for, what matters most, and how the details connect to the main point. When you bury your core message in the middle, or save it for the end, people can't tell what's important. They miss key points, and they often reach incorrect conclusions before you've even had a chance to clarify. This principle, often called front-loading your message, applies across communication formats. In business writing, you lead with an executive summary. In presentations, you tell people what you're going to tell them before you tell them. In difficult conversations, you state your intent up front rather than dancing around the topic. You give people the destination before you take them on the journey. Conciseness is equally critical, but often misunderstood. Being concise doesn't mean being simplistic or leaving out necessary information. It means maximizing substance while minimizing unnecessary words. It's about efficiency and respect for your audience's time and attention. Every word you use should earn its place in your message. If a word or phrase doesn't add meaning, clarity, or necessary context, it's taking up space that could be better used or eliminated entirely. This level of discipline is hard because most people have been trained to associate length with thoroughness and brevity with superficiality. But the opposite is often true. Concatenating unnecessary words forces you to think more carefully about what you actually mean and how to express it precisely. Consider the difference between these two statements. Due to the fact that we are experiencing a significant delay in the delivery of the materials that are needed for the project, we are going to have to make the decision to postpone the timeline. Versus, the material delay forces us to postpone the project. The second version conveys the same essential information in a fraction of the words. It's clearer, more direct, and easier to process. Most people's communication is filled with filler phrases like, due to the fact that, in order to, at this point in time, And it should be noted that these phrases add no meaning. They're verbal throat clearing, ways of filling space while your brain catches up to your mouth. Learning to recognize and eliminate these phrases from your communication makes you dramatically more effective. Research on message comprehension has found that people understand and retain information better when it's presented concisely. This is partly because our working memory has limited capacity. When messages are padded with unnecessary information, we waste cognitive resources processing words that don't matter, leaving less capacity for the words that do. Concise communication respects the cognitive constraints of human attention and memory. This doesn't mean you should communicate in telegram style, stripping out all personality and nuance. The goal isn't robotic efficiency, the goal is thoughtful economy, using words purposefully to create the desired effect without waste. Sometimes additional words are necessary for tone, emphasis, or emotional connection. The key is intentionality. Every word should be there for a reason. One powerful technique for achieving consciousness is to write or mentally draft your message, then cut it by 25 to 30%. This forces you to identify what's truly essential versus what's just habitual verbosity. You'll often find that the shorter version is not only more concise, but actually clearer, because the process of cutting forces you to refine your thinking and sharpen your language. Clarity and conciseness also require appropriate word choice. The best words are usually the simplest ones that accurately convey your meaning. Using unnecessarily complex or technical language when simpler alternatives exist creates barriers to understanding. This is especially important when communicating across different levels of expertise, different educational backgrounds, or different native languages. Some people use complex language to try to sound smart or authoritative. This almost always backfires. Research has consistently shown that people perceive clear, simple communication as a sign of intelligence and competence, while unnecessarily complex communication is often seen as pompous or insecure. If you can't explain something simply, it usually means you don't understand it well enough yourself. That said, appropriate complexity has its place. When you're communicating with specialists in a field, using precise technical terminology can be more efficient and accurate than trying to simplify everything. The key is matching your language to your audience's level of knowledge and comfort. This requires awareness of who you're communicating with and what they need in order to understand. Structure also impacts both clarity and conciseness. Well-structured messages with clear beginnings, middles, and endings are easier to follow and remember. Using signpost phrases that orient your audience to where you are in your message helps people track your logic. Things like first, additionally, however, and in conclusion might seem simple, but they provide crucial navigation cues that prevent confusion. In written communication, formatting contributes significantly to clarity, breaking information into manageable paragraphs, using bullet points for lists, highlighting key terms, and including headers all make your message easier to scan and absorb. Large blocks of unbroken text overwhelm readers and obscure your main points. Strategic formatting guides attention to what matters most. Visual clarity matters in spoken communication too. Though it manifests differently, the equivalent of formatting in verbal communication is pacing, pausing, and emphasis. When you speak, pauses give people time to process what you've said before moving on. Varying your pace and emphasis signals what's important. A long run-on verbal stream with no breaks is the spoken equivalent of a wall of text. It's hard to follow and easy to tune out. One of the biggest obstacles to clear, concise communication is the assumption that more detail is always better. Sometimes it is. When you're explaining a complex process, providing instructions, or building an argument, appropriate detail is necessary, but many people err on the side of over-explaining, providing far more detail than the situation requires because they're anxious about being misunderstood or want to appear thorough. The problem with excessive detail is that it obscures your main point. People get lost in the weeds and lose track of the forest. They can't distinguish what's essential from what's supplementary. And paradoxically, the more you say, the less people remember. Research on memory and attention shows that people retain core messages better when they're not competing with excessive additional information. A useful framework for managing detail is the inverted pyramid structure from journalism. You start with the most important information, the essential facts, or the core message. Then you add layers of supporting detail in descending order of importance. This way, if someone stops reading or listening partway through, they've still gotten the crucial information, and if they need more depth, they can continue. This structure also helps you make real-time adjustments based on audience reaction. If you're speaking with someone and you see they're getting what you're saying, you can move on without over-explaining. If you see confusion, you can provide more detail. But if you start with all the detail up front, you've already lost them before you've reached your point. Context is another important consideration for clarity. Your audience needs enough context to make sense of your message, but not so much that they get bogged down in background information. Finding this balance requires judgment and often depends on your audience's existing knowledge. What's self-evident to you might be completely new to them, or vice versa. A common clarity mistake is assuming too much shared knowledge. You reference events, people, or concepts that are familiar to you without realizing your audience has no idea what you're talking about. This is especially common in professional settings where people are deep in the details of their work and forget that others don't have the same context. Periodically checking in with your audience, asking if they're following or if they need clarification on anything, helps catch these gaps before they derail understanding. Consistency, the third element of the communication triad, works hand in hand with clarity and conciseness. Consistent messaging means your core points remain the same across time and context. You're not contradicting yourself, changing your story, or saying one thing to one audience and something else to another. Inconsistency breeds confusion and erodes trust. People don't know what to believe when your messages keep shifting. Maintaining consistency doesn't mean you can never change your mind or refine your thinking. It means when you do, you acknowledge it explicitly rather than pretending you've been saying the same thing all along. I previously said X, but based on new information, I now think Y. Maintains consistency by being transparent about the change. Inconsistency is when you say X, then later say Y, and deny ever saying X in the first place. Technology has created new challenges for clarity and conciseness, particularly in written digital communication. Texts, emails, and messages can easily become ambiguous because tone and nonverbal cues are absent. What seems obviously joking to you might read as serious to someone else. What you intend as brief and efficient might come across as cold or dismissive. This is where deliberate clarity becomes even more important. In digital communication, you often need to be more explicit about things like tone, intent, and emotional state than you would in face-to-face conversation. Adding something like, "I'm not upset, just sharing this for your awareness," or "I'm excited about this," helps fill in the emotional context that would be obvious in person but gets lost in text. The speed of digital communication also works against conciseness. It's tempting to dash off quick messages without taking time to organize your thoughts or edit your words. But this convenience often creates more work on the receiving end as people try to parse poorly constructed messages or engage in lengthy back and forth exchanges to clarify what could have been communicated clearly in the first place. Research on email effectiveness has found that messages that are short, specific, and action-oriented get better response rates and faster replies. Long, rambling emails get ignored, delayed, or mishandled because recipients either can't figure out what you want or don't want to invest the time to decode your message. If you want people to actually engage with your communication, make it as easy as possible for them to do so. One practical technique for improving clarity in all forms of communication is the "so what" test. After you've crafted your message, ask yourself, "So what? Why should my audience care? What do I want them to understand or do as a result of this communication?" If you can't answer these questions clearly, your message probably isn't clear either. Revise until the "so what" is obvious. Another useful technique is to get feedback from people who represent your intended audience. Before sending an important message or giving a presentation, test it on someone who has similar knowledge and perspective to your actual audience. Ask them to summarize what they understood your main point to be. If their summary doesn't match your intent, you have clarity work to do. The ultimate goal of clarity and conciseness is to make your communication effortless for your audience to receive and process. You want them thinking about your message, not working to figure out what your message is. You want your ideas landing with impact, not getting diluted in a sea of unnecessary words. You want to be known as someone who communicates in a way that respects people's time and intelligence. This takes practice and discipline. Most people's natural communication style is not optimally clear or concise. We ramble, we over-explain, we assume understanding that isn't there. But like any skill, you can improve through deliberate practice and attention. Every email you write, every conversation you have, every presentation you give is an opportunity to practice crafting clearer, more concise messages. Start noticing your patterns. Do you tend to bury your main point? Do you use filler phrases habitually? Do you over-explain things that don't need extensive explanation? Simply becoming aware of these tendencies is the first step toward changing them. Then consciously work on one aspect at a time. Maybe this week you focus on leading with your main point. Next week you work on cutting filler phrases. Gradually, these improvements compound into significantly more effective communication. The payoff is substantial. When you communicate clearly and concisely, people actually listen to you, your ideas get understood and acted upon, your relationships improve because misunderstandings decrease. Your professional reputation strengthens because you're seen as someone who can articulate thoughts effectively. And perhaps most importantly, you waste less of your own and others' time, freeing up mental energy and attention for what actually matters. But clarity and consciousness, as important as they are, still only address part of the communication equation, because the most brilliantly clear and concise message can still fail completely if it doesn't account for the human being on the receiving end, their emotional state, their concerns, their perspective, and their context. This is where emotional intelligence enters the picture. Reading the room, emotional intelligence, and communication. You can have perfect technique, flawless clarity, and impeccable timing, but if you can't read the emotional landscape of your audience, your communication will miss the mark. This is what separates good communicators from great ones: the ability to perceive, understand, and respond to the emotional dynamics present in any interaction. Emotional intelligence in communication isn't about manipulation or trying to control how others feel. It's about awareness, recognizing what's happening emotionally, both within yourself and in the people you're engaging with, and adjusting your approach accordingly. It's about understanding that communication doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens between real people with feelings, histories, concerns, and needs that profoundly shape how they receive and interpret messages. Research on emotional intelligence has consistently demonstrated its critical importance in effective communication. Studies have shown that leaders with high emotional intelligence are better at active listening, maintaining appropriate tone, using positive body language, and creating psychological safety in their teams. They're able to navigate difficult conversations more successfully because they can perceive and manage the emotional currents flowing through those interactions. The foundation of emotional intelligence is self-awareness, understanding your own emotional state and how it influences your communication. When you're angry, anxious, excited, or defensive, your emotions color everything you say and how you say it. They affect your word choice, your tone, your body language, and your ability to listen. If you're not aware of what you're feeling, you can't manage how those feelings impact your communication. Think about the last time you tried to have an important conversation while you were stressed or upset. How well did that go? Chances are, your emotional state interfered with your ability to communicate effectively. Maybe you were more reactive than you intended to be. Maybe you misinterpreted something because you were already on edge. Maybe your tone came across as harsh, even though that wasn't your intent. This is what happens when emotion runs the show without awareness moderating it. Self-awareness allows you to notice when your emotional state is likely to undermine effective communication. When you recognize that you're too angry to have a productive conversation right now, you can choose to postpone it until you've calmed down. When you realize you're feeling defensive, you can consciously work to remain open rather than shutting down. When you notice anxiety is making you talk too fast or over-explain, you can deliberately slow down and simplify. This doesn't mean suppressing or ignoring your emotions. Emotions are valuable sources of information. They tell you what matters to you and what needs attention, but there's a difference between acknowledging your emotions and being controlled by them. Self-awareness creates space between feeling and action, allowing you to choose how to respond rather than reacting automatically. The second component of emotional intelligence is empathy, the ability to recognize and understand what others are feeling. Empathy is what allows you to perceive when someone is uncomfortable, even though they're saying they're fine. It's what helps you recognize that someone's anger is actually covering up hurt or fear. It's what enables you to sense when your message is landing versus when it's creating resistance. Empathy isn't mind reading, and it's not about assuming you know exactly what someone else is experiencing. It's about being attuned to emotional cues and creating space to understand another person's perspective. It's observing their nonverbal signals, listening to the emotions beneath their words, and asking yourself what might be driving their reactions. Research in neuroscience has revealed that humans have specialized neural networks dedicated to empathy and social cognition. When we observe someone else experiencing an emotion, similar patterns activate in our own brains. This is why watching someone in pain can make us wince, or why someone's genuine smile can brighten our mood. We're wired for emotional resonance with others, but this wiring can be overridden or underdeveloped. People who've experienced emotional invalidation or trauma may have learned to shut down their empathic responses as a protective mechanism. Others may have simply never developed a habit of paying attention to emotional cues because they were raised in environments where emotions were ignored or minimized. The good news is that empathy can be cultivated and strengthened through practice. It starts with paying attention to emotional information that you might typically overlook. When someone is speaking, don't just listen to their words. Notice their tone, their facial expressions, their energy. Ask yourself what they might be feeling and why. Consider what it would be like to be in their situation with their concerns and constraints. Empathy is particularly crucial in difficult conversations. When you're delivering criticism, disappointing news, or addressing a conflict, the other person's emotional state will dramatically influence how they receive your message. If they feel attacked or dismissed, their defenses go up and your message bounces off. If they feel respected and understood, they're able to hear even difficult information constructively. This is why effective communicators often start challenging conversations by acknowledging the other person's perspective and emotions. Before diving into what you need to say, you create connection and safety by demonstrating that you understand where they're coming from. This doesn't mean you agree with them or that you're abandoning your own position. It means you're recognizing their humanity and their experience before asking them to engage with yours. Understanding your audience goes beyond empathy to include practical awareness of their context, concerns, and priorities. The same message will land completely differently depending on who's receiving it, what they care about, what they already know, and what they need from the interaction. This is why one-size-fits-all communication so often fails. The approach that works perfectly with one person or group bombs with another, not because your message was wrong, but because you didn't adapt it to your specific audience. Skilled communicators are like skilled musicians. They have a repertoire of techniques they can draw from, but they choose which ones to use based on what the situation requires. Consider how differently you communicate the same basic information to different audiences. If you're explaining a new policy to frontline employees versus senior executives, the details you emphasize, the language you use, and the concerns you address will be different. The employees might care most about how it affects their daily work, while executives might focus on strategic implications and organizational impact. Or think about cultural differences in communication norms. In some cultures, direct communication and explicit disagreement are valued as honest and efficient. In others, indirect communication and harmony maintenance are prioritized. If you communicate in a style that violates your audience's cultural expectations, your message can be perceived as rude or inappropriate regardless of your intent. This doesn't mean you have to become a completely different person for every audience. It means you need to be flexible and adaptable, maintaining your authenticity while adjusting your approach to meet people where they are. It's like speaking someone's language. You can still express your own thoughts and ideas, but you do it in a way they can understand and receive. Emotional intelligence also involves managing your own emotional impact on others. Whether you intend to or not, your emotional state is contagious. Research on emotional contagion has demonstrated that emotions spread between people through subtle behavioral and physiological synchronization. When you're calm and confident, people around you tend to feel more calm and confident. When you're anxious or agitated, that anxiety spreads. This has profound implications for leadership and any situation where you're trying to influence others. If you want people to feel reassured during a crisis, you need to project calm even if you're feeling uncertain. If you want to inspire enthusiasm for a project, you need to embody genuine excitement. If you want to have a productive, difficult conversation, you need to manage your own reactivity so it doesn't trigger defensive reactions. This isn't about being fake or hiding your true feelings. It's about being responsible for the emotional energy you bring into interactions and recognizing that your emotional state shapes the entire communication context. Leaders who understand this take time to regulate their emotions before important interactions, knowing that whatever they're feeling will set the tone for everyone else. Timing is another crucial aspect of emotional intelligence in communication. There's a right time and a wrong time for difficult conversations, important requests, or emotionally charged topics. Trying to have a serious discussion when someone is exhausted, distracted, or dealing with other stressors is setting yourself up for failure. The message might be perfect, but if the timing is wrong, it won't land. Emotionally intelligent communicators pay attention to whether someone is in a state to receive their message. They notice signs of stress, distraction, or emotional overwhelm, and either adjust their approach or wait for a better moment. This requires patience and sometimes the willingness to delay your own needs temporarily in service of more effective communication later. There's also the matter of emotional regulation during communication itself. Conversations can trigger strong reactions, especially when they touch on sensitive topics or when there's disagreement. Your ability to notice and manage your emotional responses in real time determines whether the conversation stays productive or spirals into dysfunction. When you feel yourself getting defensive, angry, or shutting down, emotional intelligence gives you the tools to pause, breathe, and choose your response rather than reacting automatically. This might mean taking a brief break to collect yourself, explicitly acknowledging that you're having a strong reaction and need a moment, or using techniques like reframing to shift your perspective on what's happening. The research on stress and communication is clear. When we're stressed or emotionally overwhelmed, our ability to communicate effectively deteriorates. We misread others more frequently, we send confusing nonverbal signals, and we fall into unhealthy knee-jerk patterns. Learning to manage stress and regulate emotions isn't a nice-to-have communication skill. It's essential for maintaining effectiveness under pressure. Emotional intelligence also means recognizing that sometimes the most important thing you can communicate is validation and understanding rather than solutions or advice. Many communication failures happen because someone is trying to fix a problem, when what's actually needed is simply acknowledgement of the emotional experience. When someone shares something difficult they're going through and you immediately jump to advice or try to cheer them up, you're essentially telling them that their feelings are something to be solved or gotten past, rather than something valid and worthy of attention. This often makes people feel dismissed, even though your intention was to help. Emotional intelligence helps you discern when to offer solutions and when to simply bear witness to someone's experience. Another dimension of emotional intelligence in communication involves managing your own need to be right or to win arguments. When ego gets involved in conversations, when you're more invested in proving your point than in understanding or finding truth, communication breaks down. You stop listening genuinely and start looking for ammunition. You interpret questions as attacks. You take disagreement personally. Emotionally intelligent communicators can separate their sense of self-worth from being right in every interaction. They can acknowledge when they're wrong, consider perspectives that challenge their own, and change their minds based on new information without feeling diminished. This openness creates space for genuine dialogue rather than defensive posturing. Cultural competence is a critical element of emotional intelligence that deserves special attention. Communication norms vary dramatically across cultures in terms of directness, formality, emotional expression, conflict management, and much more. What's considered emotionally intelligent communication in one cultural context might be seen as inappropriate or ineffective in another. For example, in many Western cultures, direct expression of emotions and explicit discussion of feelings is often valued as honest and healthy. In many Asian cultures, emotional restraint and indirect communication about feelings might be preferred as mature and respectful. Neither approach is inherently better. They're different cultural frameworks for navigating emotional expression and communication. When communicating across cultures, emotional intelligence requires humility and curiosity rather than assuming your own cultural norms are universal. It means being willing to learn about different communication styles, asking questions when unsure, and adapting your approach while still maintaining authenticity. It means recognizing that misunderstandings may arise from cultural differences rather than personal offense. The same principles apply to other forms of diversity: neurodiversity, generational differences, personality differences. Emotional intelligence in communication means recognizing that not everyone processes information or experiences emotion in the same ways you do. Someone with autism might struggle with the ambiguity of indirect communication. Someone from a younger generation might have different norms around digital communication. Someone with an introverted personality might need more processing time before responding. Skilled communicators develop flexibility, the ability to adapt their style to different people and contexts without losing their core authenticity. This is different from being fake or manipulative. It's about meeting people where they are, rather than demanding they meet you where you are. It's recognizing that effective communication is a collaborative process that requires both parties to find common ground. Emotional intelligence also involves recognizing and managing power dynamics in communication. When there's a power differential between communicators, Whether due to organizational hierarchy, social status, expertise, or other factors, it shapes the emotional landscape of the interaction. The person with more power has more freedom to be direct, to interrupt, to set the agenda. The person with less power may feel constrained, anxious, or unable to speak freely. Emotionally intelligent communicators who hold power positions are aware of how their position affects others and work to create safety and openness despite the power differential. They might explicitly invite candor, demonstrate openness to disagreement, or share vulnerability to reduce the emotional distance created by hierarchy. They recognize that their impact is magnified by their position and take responsibility for managing that impact thoughtfully. One of the most important applications of emotional intelligence is in managing your own communication during emotional conversations. When emotions are running high for you or for others, the risk of communication breakdown increases dramatically. Emotional intelligence gives you tools to navigate these high-stakes moments more effectively. This might mean explicitly acknowledging emotions present in the conversation. I can see this is really frustrating for you, and I want to understand your concerns. It might mean taking breaks when emotions become too intense. I think we're both getting heated, and I want to have this conversation productively. Can we take 10 minutes and come back to this? It might mean reframing the conversation in terms of shared goals. I know we disagree on approach, but we both want the project to succeed. Let's focus on that. The key is that emotional intelligence gives you options. Instead of being swept away by emotional currents or rigidly trying to ignore them, you can work with emotions as part of the communication landscape, acknowledging them, managing them, and sometimes harnessing them productively. Research has consistently shown that emotional intelligence can be developed throughout life. It's not a fixed trait you either have or don't have. Through deliberate practice, feedback, and reflection, you can strengthen your emotional awareness, empathy, and regulation skills. Every interaction is an opportunity to practice noticing emotions in yourself and others, considering how they're influencing the communication, and making more emotionally intelligent choices about how to respond. The foundation for all of this is simply paying attention. Most people move through interactions on autopilot, not really noticing the emotional dimensions of communication. Just making a practice of asking yourself, what am I feeling right now? What might the other person be feeling? How are these emotions affecting our interaction? Begins to develop the awareness that emotional intelligence requires. With that awareness comes choice, and with choice comes the possibility of communicating in ways that build connection, foster understanding, and navigate complexity with greater skill and effectiveness. But awareness and emotional intelligence need to be channeled through specific communication techniques. One of the most powerful yet underutilized techniques is the strategic use of questions, which we need to explore next. The art of powerful questions. Most people think they know how to ask questions. After all, we've been asking them since we were children. But there's a massive difference between asking questions out of habit or curiosity and using questions strategically as a communication tool. The right question at the right time can unlock understanding, deepen connection, shift perspectives, and move conversations forward in ways that statements never could. Questions serve multiple functions in communication. They gather information, obviously, but they also demonstrate interest, create space for others to think and express themselves, challenge assumptions, redirect focus, and establish collaborative rather than combative dynamics. The most skilled communicators use questions deliberately, understanding that how you ask and what you ask shapes the entire trajectory of an interaction. There's a fundamental distinction between open and closed questions. Closed questions can be answered with yes, no, or a specific piece of information. Did you finish the report is closed. Open questions invite elaboration and exploration. What challenges did you encounter with the report is open. Both have their place, but open questions generally create richer dialogue and deeper understanding. When you want to encourage someone to share more, to think more deeply, or to explore their own thoughts and feelings, open questions are your tool. They signal that you're interested in their perspective, not just checking a box or extracting specific data. They create space for nuance, complexity, and discovery that closed questions foreclose. That said, closed questions are perfectly appropriate when you need specific information quickly or when you're trying to make a decision that requires clarity. Can you have this done by Friday? Is a closed question that gets you the information you need. The problem is when people default to closed questions in situations that would benefit from openness, missing opportunities for deeper insight and connection. The way you frame questions dramatically influences the responses you get. Consider the difference between why did you do it that way and what was your thinking behind that approach. Both are technically asking for the same information, but the first carries judgment and puts the person on the defensive. The second expresses genuine curiosity about their reasoning and invites them to explain rather than justify. Questions beginning with why often trigger defensiveness because they can sound accusatory, like you're asking someone to defend their choices. Questions starting with what or how tend to feel more exploratory and less threatening. What led you to that conclusion? Or how did you arrive at that decision? Gather the same information as why did you decide that, but with a tone that facilitates rather than inhibits honest sharing. Powerful questions are also characterized by their focus and specificity. Vague questions like how are things going typically elicit vague responses like fine or okay. More specific questions like what's been most challenging about the new process or what aspect of the project are you most excited about invite substantive responses because they give people a clear direction to take their answer. This doesn't mean you should never ask broad questions. Sometimes how are you is exactly what's needed, a simple social ritual or genuine check-in. But when you want to deepen understanding or move past surface level exchange, specificity in your questions helps tremendously. Another key distinction is between questions that genuinely seek understanding and questions that are really statements in disguise. Leading questions like don't you think we should do it this way or isn't it obvious that this won't work aren't actually looking for input. They're trying to manipulate the other person into agreeing with you. People can tell the difference, and disguising statements as questions damages trust. Genuine questions come from a place of not knowing and wanting to understand. You're actually open to learning something new, hearing a different perspective, or discovering that your assumptions were wrong. This openness is palpable in how you ask and how you receive the answers. When your mind is already made up and you're just trying to get others to agree with you, your questions feel manipulative regardless of how you phrase them. Clarifying questions are particularly valuable for preventing misunderstandings and ensuring accurate comprehension. When someone says something you're not sure you understood correctly, asking them to clarify is far better than assuming you know what they meant. When you say the timeline is aggressive, what specifically concerns you about it? Or can you help me understand what you mean by saying the T's isn't aligned? These questions prevent the common problem of people talking past each other because they're using the same words to mean different things. Reflecting questions, where you ask people to elaborate on something they've said, show that you're paying attention and want to understand more deeply. You mentioned that was frustrating. What was most frustrating about it? Or earlier you said you felt conflicted. Can you tell me more about that? These questions signal active listening and give people permission to go deeper into their thoughts and feelings. Questions can also be powerful tools for helping people think through problems themselves, rather than always looking to you for answers. Instead of immediately providing solutions when someone comes to you with a problem, strategic questions can guide them to discover their own solutions. What options have you considered, or what would need to be true for this to work? Or what's one small step you could take toward resolving this? This approach, fundamental to coaching methodology, respects people's capability to solve their own problems while providing the structure and support to do so. It's also more effective in the long run because solutions people generate themselves tend to have more buy-in and better implementation than solutions imposed from outside. However, there's a balance to strike. Sometimes people genuinely need information, advice, or direct input, not more questions. The Socratic method of endlessly questioning can become frustrating and feel dismissive if overused. Skilled communicators can tell when questions are helpful for facilitating thinking and when they're just avoiding the responsibility of providing needed guidance. Questions are also invaluable in managing difficult conversations and conflicts. When tensions are high and people are entrenched in their positions, questions can create openings for dialogue that statements cannot. What's most important to you about this, or what would an acceptable outcome look like from your perspective? These questions shift the focus from positions people are defending to interests and needs underlying those positions. In negotiations and conflict resolution, understanding interests rather than just positions is crucial. Someone's position is what they say they want. Their interest is why they want it. Two people can have completely opposed positions but compatible interests. Questions help uncover those deeper interests, creating possibilities for solutions that satisfy everyone's needs, even if neither gets their initial position. Curiosity-driven questions can also diffuse tension by shifting the dynamic from combat to collaboration. When you're genuinely curious about someone's perspective, even one you disagree with, it changes the emotional tone of the interaction. I'm genuinely curious about your view on this. Can you help me understand your reasoning? This question doesn't mean you're going to agree, but it signals respect and willingness to understand before judging. The timing and pacing of questions matters as much as their content. Rapid fire questions can feel like interrogation, putting people on the defensive and making them feel like they're being grilled. Giving people time to think before they answer, sitting comfortably with silence while they formulate their response, creates space for more thoughtful answers and deeper reflection. Western cultures, particularly in business contexts, often struggle with silence. There's pressure to fill every gap with words, but silence is actually a powerful communication tool. After asking a meaningful question, resist the urge to rephrase it, add additional questions, or answer it yourself. Let the silence sit. Give the other person time to think. Often the most insightful responses come after a pause, when someone has had a moment to really consider the question rather than just responding reflexively. Questions can also be used strategically to shift focus or redirect unproductive conversations. If a discussion is getting bogged down in details, a question like, "What's the bigger picture we're trying to address here?" can zoom out to more strategic thinking. If people are spiraling into complaint, "What would you like to see instead?" redirects toward constructive problem solving. However, redirecting questions need to be used carefully. If someone is trying to share something important and you redirect them, they'll feel dismissed. Timing is everything. Sometimes people need to fully express their concerns, frustrations, or ideas before they're ready to shift focus. Interrupting that process with redirecting questions can damage rather than help the communication. Follow-up questions demonstrate deep listening and genuine interest. When someone shares something and you ask a thoughtful follow-up question based on what they said, it shows you were really paying attention. You mentioned that changed how you see the situation. What specifically shifted for you? This level of engagement is rare and therefore powerful when it happens. In contrast, questions that ignore what was just said or jump to unrelated topics signal that you weren't really listening. You were just waiting for your turn to talk. This is one of the quickest ways to shut down open communication and make people reluctant to share with you in the future. Self-reflective questions that you ask yourself can also improve your communication. Before important interactions, asking yourself questions like, "What do I want to achieve in this conversation? What might the other person be feeling or needing? What assumptions am I bringing that I should challenge?" helps you prepare more thoughtfully and communicate more intentionally. After interactions, reflective questions like, "What went well in that conversation? What could I have done differently? What did I learn about the other person or the situation?" help you continuously improve your communication skills through deliberate practice and analysis. Questions can also surface assumptions and test understanding in ways that prevent costly mistakes. Before moving forward with a plan or decision, questions like, "What are we assuming to be true that might not be?" or "What could go wrong that we haven't considered?" help identify blind spots and strengthen thinking. In group settings, facilitative questions keep discussions productive and inclusive. "What hasn't been said yet?" invites quieter voices to contribute. "Where do we have agreement and where do we diverge?" helps clarify areas of consensus and disagreement. "What needs to happen for us to move forward?" focuses the group on action rather than endless discussion. The key to using questions effectively is that they must be genuine. When people sense you're asking questions you already know the answer to, or that you're using questions to manipulate rather than understand, it backfires. Authenticity in questioning means you're truly open to the answer, whatever it might be. You're asking because you want to know, not because you're trying to lead someone to a predetermined conclusion. This means being prepared for answers that surprise you, challenge you, or reveal things you'd rather not know. If you ask someone for honest feedback and then get defensive when they provide it, you've taught them not to be honest with you in the future. If you ask what people think and then ignore their input, you've shown that your questions weren't genuine. Building a practice of asking better questions transforms your communication. It shifts you from telling mode to learning mode, from asserting to exploring, from assuming to discovering. It makes every interaction an opportunity to deepen understanding, strengthen relationships, and expand perspective. But questions alone aren't enough. They need to be supported by all the other elements of communication we've discussed, and particularly by the nonverbal signals that either reinforce or contradict your words. That's what we need to address next. Nonverbal mastery, aligning your body with your message. Your body is speaking, whether you're aware of it or not. Every gesture, every facial expression, every shift in posture is communicating something. The question isn't whether you're sending nonverbal messages, it's whether those messages are aligned with what you intend to communicate or working against you. We've already established that nonverbal communication accounts for the majority of how your message is received, particularly when it comes to attitudes and emotions. But understanding this intellectually and actually mastering your nonverbal communication are two very different things. Most people have habitual body language patterns they're completely unaware of, patterns that may be undermining their effectiveness every time they communicate. Eye contact is one of the most powerful nonverbal tools at your disposal, but it's also one of the most misunderstood. In many Western cultures, appropriate eye contact signals confidence, honesty, and engagement. Avoiding eye contact can be interpreted as dishonesty, insecurity, or disinterest. But the key word is appropriate. Staring intensely without breaks can be intimidating or threatening. The right amount of eye contact is natural, regular, and responsive to the other person's comfort level. Research in social psychology has shown that people make snap judgments about trustworthiness based largely on facial expressions, and eyes play a crucial role. Slightly raised eyebrows combined with a small smile creates the most trustworthy facial expression according to studies. Eyes that are warm and engaged that crinkle slightly at the corners with genuine emotion convey authenticity in ways that words alone cannot. But eye contact norms vary dramatically across cultures. In many Asian cultures, prolonged eye contact, especially with authority figures, is considered disrespectful. Looking down is a sign of respect, not dishonesty. In some Latino cultures, direct eye contact can be seen as challenging or aggressive. What's appropriate in one context is inappropriate in another, which means skilled communicators need to be observant and adaptable rather than rigidly applying rules. Facial expressions communicate emotion faster than any other channel. Research has shown that certain facial expressions associated with emotions like happiness, sadness, anger, fear, and surprise are recognized across cultures, suggesting some universal elements to emotional expression. However, cultural display rules govern when and how intensely these emotions should be shown. The challenge with facial expressions is that they're often unconscious. Your face may be showing annoyance, skepticism, or boredom while you're trying to appear neutral and receptive. This incongruence between your intention and your expression creates confusion and mistrust. People will believe your face over your words every time because facial expressions are harder to fake convincingly. Developing awareness of your facial expressions requires effort. Most people have no idea what their face looks like during normal conversation. Recording yourself, watching yourself on video calls, or asking trusted friends for feedback can reveal expressions you didn't know you were making. That slight eye roll, that pursed lip, that raised eyebrow, all these tiny movements are being read by others, even if you're not conscious of making them. Posture communicates attitude, confidence, and engagement. Sitting up straight with an open chest signals attention and engagement. Slouching or leaning away signals disinterest or disengagement. Leaning forward slightly shows that you're interested and involved in the conversation. Your posture quite literally shapes how people perceive your level of engagement and respect. But posture also affects your own psychology. Research on embodied cognition has demonstrated that your physical posture influences your mental and emotional state. When you adopt confident posture, you actually feel more confident. When you slouch, you feel less powerful and more uncertain. This means posture isn't just about signaling to others, it's also a tool for managing your own internal state. Arms and hands are particularly expressive parts of nonverbal communication. Crossed arms are often interpreted as defensive or closed off, though sometimes people cross their arms simply because they're cold or it's comfortable. Open arms and palms, on the other hand, signal openness and honesty. Hands that are visible and used expressively enhance communication, while hands hidden in pockets or constantly fidgeting can signal nervousness or discomfort. Gestures serve to emphasize and illustrate verbal communication. When used purposefully, gestures make your message more memorable and engaging. Research has shown that people comprehend information better when it's accompanied by relevant gestures. Hand movements that match and reinforce what you're saying help people understand and retain your message. However, excessive or distracting gestures can overwhelm your message. If you're constantly moving your hands in ways that don't connect to what you're saying, people focus on the movement rather than the content. The key is intentionality. Gestures should enhance rather than distract, support rather than contradict. Distance and spatial positioning. What researchers call proxemics communicates relationship, power, and intimacy. Standing very close to someone creates intimacy, but can also be invasive if it violates their comfort zone. Standing too far away can signal coldness or disconnection. The appropriate distance varies based on relationship, culture, and context. In professional settings in Western cultures, typical interpersonal distance is around 3 to 4 feet for business interactions. Closer than that enters personal space, which is generally reserved for friends and family. Further than that becomes public distance, appropriate for formal presentations or when addressing groups. Violating these norms, either by getting too close or staying too distant, creates discomfort even if people can't articulate why. But touch is perhaps the most culturally variable aspect of nonverbal communication. In some cultures, touch is a normal part of casual interaction. In others, touch outside of handshakes is inappropriate in professional contexts. Gender norms around touch also vary widely. The general principle is to be conservative and respectful, taking cues from the other person and the cultural context rather than assuming your own comfort level is universal. Vocal elements, while technically still involving sound, are considered part of nonverbal communication because they're about how you speak rather than what you say. Tone, pitch, volume, pace, and inflection all carry meaning. The same words can communicate completely different messages depending on how they're spoken. Consider the simple phrase, "That's interesting," said with genuine curiosity and an upward inflection. It invites further discussion. Said with a flat tone and slight sarcasm, it's a polite dismissal. Said slowly with emphasis on each word, it might express skepticism. The words are identical. The meaning changes entirely based on vocal delivery. Research has shown that vocal tone is particularly important when there's ambiguity or potential conflict. When you're delivering difficult feedback, the tone you use can determine whether the person hears it as helpful input or personal attack. A warm, supportive tone can make criticism easier to receive. A harsh or cold tone can make even legitimate praise feel insincere. Pace and pausing are underutilized vocal tools. Speaking too quickly can signal nervousness or make it hard for others to follow your thinking. Speaking too slowly can sound condescending or bore your audience. Strategic pauses give people time to absorb what you've said and signal that something important just happened or is about to happen. The challenge with all nonverbal communication is achieving congruence, ensuring that your verbal and nonverbal messages align. When there's incongruence, when your words say one thing but your body says another, people trust the nonverbal message. This is why you can't effectively fake enthusiasm, sincerity, or confidence. If you don't genuinely feel it, your body will leak the truth through micro-expressions, tension, or subtle inconsistencies. This means the most powerful way to improve your nonverbal communication isn't to memorize a list of what each gesture means and try to consciously control every movement. It's to become more authentic and aligned internally, to work toward genuinely feeling what you want to communicate. When your words match your feelings, which match your body language, communication becomes powerful and effortless. That said, there are situations where you need to manage your nonverbal communication even when your internal state isn't ideal. If you're nervous before a presentation, you can deliberately adopt confident posture and steady breathing to help manage that nervousness and prevent it from overwhelming your message. If you're frustrated during a meeting, you can consciously relax your facial expression and maintain open body language to keep the interaction productive. This isn't about being fake, it's about being professional. It's about not letting momentary emotional states derail important interactions. It's recognizing that while you can't always control how you feel, you can exercise some control over how you express those feelings, especially in contexts where authenticity needs to be balanced with effectiveness. Cultural competence in nonverbal communication cannot be overstated. Beyond the examples already mentioned, countless nonverbal norms vary across cultures. Acceptable volume levels, whether interrupting shows engagement or rudeness, whether silence is comfortable or awkward, whether showing emotion is authentic or unprofessional. Operating across cultures requires humility, observation, and willingness to learn rather than assuming your norms are universal. The same applies to individual differences. Neurodivergent individuals may have different patterns of eye contact, facial expression, or body language that don't match neurotypical norms, but aren't indicative of disengagement or dishonesty. Someone with social anxiety might exhibit nervous behaviors that shouldn't be misinterpreted as deception or disrespect. Good communicators learn to read individuals on their own terms rather than applying rigid rules. Technology has created new challenges for nonverbal communication. On video calls, you lose access to full body language and must rely more heavily on facial expressions and vocal tone. The slight delay in video transmission can disrupt natural conversational rhythms. The awkwardness of staring at a camera versus looking at people on screen affects eye contact dynamics. Text-based communication eliminates most nonverbal cues entirely, making miscommunication more likely. Adapting to these technological realities requires conscious compensation. On video calls, you might need to exaggerate nodding or facial expressions slightly so they register through the screen. In text communication, you might need to use more explicit emotional language or even emojis to convey tone. You certainly need to be more careful about how messages might be misinterpreted without nonverbal context. Ultimately, mastering nonverbal communication is about awareness and intentionality. It's noticing what your body is doing, understanding what messages those behaviors might send, and making conscious choices about whether those messages align with your intentions. It's observing others more carefully, picking up on the wealth of information communicated nonverbally, and letting that inform how you engage with them. Every interaction is an opportunity to practice this awareness. Notice your posture in your next conversation. Pay attention to your facial expressions during your next video call. Observe how your gestures do or don't support what you're saying during your next presentation. Over time, this awareness becomes more automatic, and your nonverbal communication becomes more congruent, powerful, and effective. But even with mastery of all these communication elements, there are situations that remain challenging for almost everyone. Difficult conversations that involve conflict, disappointment, or tension. These interactions test all your communication skills simultaneously. Let's tackle them next. Difficult conversations, navigating conflict and tension. Everyone avoids them. Those conversations you know you need to have but keep putting off because they're going to be uncomfortable, tense, or potentially explosive. The performance issue with an employee, the boundary violation by a friend, the disagreement with a partner about something important, the feedback to someone about behavior that's causing problems. These difficult conversations don't get easier by avoiding them, they get worse. Research consistently shows that avoiding difficult conversations leads to a cascade of negative consequences. Problems fester and grow. Resentment builds. Small issues that could have been addressed easily become major conflicts. Relationships deteriorate under the weight of unspoken tension and unresolved issues. And ironically, the anxiety about having a conversation often exceeds the difficulty of actually having it. Yet people continue to avoid these conversations for understandable reasons. They fear damaging the relationship, making things worse rather than better. They worry about how the other person will react, whether they'll get angry, defensive, or hurt. They're uncertain about how to approach the topic in a way that's constructive rather than destructive. And perhaps most fundamentally, they're uncomfortable with conflict and the emotional intensity it brings. The first step in navigating difficult conversations is reframing how you think about them. These aren't confrontations where someone wins and someone loses. They are opportunities to address issues, build understanding, and strengthen relationships by dealing with problems rather than ignoring them. The goal isn't to attack or defeat the other person, it's to resolve whatever issue is creating tension or difficulty. This reframing affects your entire approach. When you enter a difficult conversation with collaborative rather than combative intent, it changes your tone, your body language, your word choices, everything. You're not preparing for battle, you're preparing for problem solving. This doesn't mean you're soft or that you abandon your concerns. It means you're committed to finding resolution rather than winning an argument. Preparation is crucial for difficult conversations. Unlike casual interactions where you can improvise, high-stakes difficult conversations benefit enormously from thinking through what you want to say, how you want to say it, and what outcomes you're hoping for. This doesn't mean scripting word for word, which often comes across as wooden and inauthentic, but it means clarifying your key points and your underlying intentions. Start by getting clear on a specific issue. What exactly is the problem? What behavior or situation needs to be addressed? Be as specific and concrete as possible rather than dealing in generalities. You're not a team player is vague and judgmental. I've noticed that in the last 3 meetings you've worked on your laptop during discussions and haven't contributed ideas. Is specific and behavioral. The more specific you are, the more productive the conversation can be. Next, consider the impact. Why does this matter? How is it affecting you, others, or the situation? Understanding and being able to articulate the impact helps you explain why you're raising the issue and why it needs to be addressed. It also helps you determine whether the conversation is truly necessary. If something bothers you but isn't actually creating meaningful negative impact, you might choose to let it go rather than creating unnecessary conflict. Then think about what you want to happen as a result of the conversation. What's your desired outcome? This should focus on the future rather than dwelling on the past. You can't change what already happened, but you can influence what happens going forward. Are you seeking behavior change, better understanding, an apology, a collaborative solution to a problem? Being clear on your goal helps keep the conversation focused and productive. It's also important to examine your own role in the situation. Very few conflicts are entirely one-sided. Asking yourself what you might have contributed to the problem, what assumptions you might be making, or how your own behavior might have played a part demonstrates fairness and makes the other person more likely to engage constructively rather than defensively. When it's time to actually have the conversation, the opening is critical. How you start shapes everything that follows. Beginning with accusation or blame puts the other person immediately on the defensive, making productive dialogue nearly impossible. Starting with curiosity and a desire to understand creates an entirely different dynamic. An opening like, "I want to talk to you about something that's been bothering me, and I'd like to understand your perspective," is much more effective than, "We need to talk about what you did wrong." The first invites dialogue, the second provokes defense. Your opening should communicate that you're approaching this as a conversation between equals, trying to solve a problem together, not as a prosecutor delivering an indictment. Using I statements rather than you accusations is a well-known technique for a reason. It works. "I felt dismissed when the meeting ended without addressing my concerns" is less likely to trigger defensiveness than "You dismissed my concerns and ended the meeting." The first describes your experience, the second assigns blame and intent. This subtle shift in language can make the difference between productive conversation and escalating conflict. That said, I statements can be misused. "I feel like you're being disrespectful" is just an accusation dressed up with "I feel" language. True I statements focus on your experience, your feelings, your observations, without attributing motives or making judgments about the other person's character. Active listening becomes even more critical in difficult conversations. When tensions are high and the topic is sensitive, the natural instinct is to focus on defending your position and making your points. But if both parties are in defensive mode, no one is actually listening, and nothing gets resolved. Someone has to break the cycle by genuinely listening to understand, rather than waiting to rebut. This doesn't mean you have to agree with everything the other person says. It means you create space for them to fully express their perspective before responding. It means asking clarifying questions to ensure you understand their concerns. It means acknowledging their feelings even if you see the situation differently. I can see this has been really frustrating for you. Doesn't mean you agree they should be frustrated. It means you recognize that they are frustrated. Staying calm is easier said than done in difficult conversations, especially when you feel attacked, misunderstood, or when the other person becomes emotional. But maintaining your own emotional regulation is essential for keeping the conversation productive. When you get reactive, when you raise your voice or become visibly angry, you escalate rather than resolve. This is where preparation helps. If you've thought through the conversation beforehand, if you've clarified your points and considered your triggers, you're less likely to be caught off guard and react badly. You can remind yourself that the goal is resolution, not winning. You can notice when you're starting to get activated and consciously choose to breathe, pause, or even take a brief break if needed. Taking breaks is actually a powerful tool in difficult conversations that few people use. When emotions are escalating and the conversation is becoming unproductive, calling a pause is mature and responsible, not weak or evasive. "I can feel us both getting heated, and I want to have this conversation productively. Can we take 10 minutes and come back to this?" This preserves the possibility of resolution while preventing the conversation from spiraling into destructiveness. Apologies, when genuine and appropriate, can be transformative in difficult conversations. If you've contributed to the problem, acknowledging that reality without defensiveness or excuse-making can shift the entire dynamic. "You're right, I should have communicated that sooner, and I apologize for leaving you in the dark," demonstrates accountability and fairness that makes the other person more willing to examine their own role. But apologies need to be genuine and specific to be effective. A perfunctory "I'm sorry you feel that way" isn't an apology, it's a dismissal. A real apology acknowledges what you did, takes responsibility for the impact, and commits to different behavior going forward. I'm sorry I interrupted you repeatedly in that meeting. I realize it was disrespectful and prevented you from sharing your ideas. I'm going to be more conscious of that going forward. Sometimes difficult conversations reveal that the two parties have fundamentally different values, needs, or perspectives that can't be easily reconciled. This doesn't necessarily mean the conversation has failed. Not all conflicts can or should be resolved with complete agreement. Sometimes the best outcome is mutual understanding of the differences and agreement on how to manage them going forward. We see this differently, and I don't think either of us is going to change our fundamental view. But I think we can agree that we both want the team to succeed, and we can commit to respecting each other's approaches even when they differ. This kind of outcome isn't perfect, but it's often realistic and sufficient for maintaining a functional relationship despite disagreement. Difficult conversations in professional contexts often involve power dynamics that add complexity. When you need to have a difficult conversation with a boss, the power differential constrains how directly you can communicate. When you're having one with an employee, your positional power means your words carry extra weight and potential threat. Being aware of these dynamics and managing them thoughtfully is essential. If you hold more power in the relationship, you need to work extra hard to create safety and openness. Explicitly inviting honest feedback, demonstrating openness to being wrong, and managing your own reactions when hearing difficult truths all help create space for authentic conversation, despite the power differential. If you have less power, you might need to be more strategic about timing, framing, and choosing your battles to minimize risk while still addressing necessary issues. Cultural factors also influence how difficult conversations should be approached. In high-context cultures where indirect communication is the norm, Western-style direct confrontation might be seen as incredibly rude and damaging. In cultures where hierarchy is highly valued, challenging someone of higher status might need to be done through very different channels than in egalitarian cultures. There's no universal formula. Cultural awareness and adaptation are essential. One of the most challenging aspects of difficult conversations is managing your own expectations. Not every difficult conversation ends with resolution, apology, and restored harmony. Sometimes the other person isn't ready or willing to engage constructively. Sometimes they respond with anger, denial, or counterattack. You can't control their reaction. You can only control your approach and your behavior. Accepting this reality means you can have the conversation you need to have without requiring a particular outcome for it to have been worthwhile. Maybe planting a seed is enough even if it doesn't immediately bear fruit. Maybe simply stating your boundary is important, even if the other person doesn't like it. Maybe expressing how you feel is valuable for your own integrity, even if it doesn't change the situation. Following up after difficult conversations is often overlooked but important. Checking in to see how the other person is feeling, reaffirming your commitment to the relationship, or discussing how any agreed upon changes are going shows that the conversation was meaningful, not just a box to check. It reinforces that your goal was genuinely improving the relationship or situation, not just having your say. The more difficult conversations you navigate successfully, the less intimidating they become. You build confidence in your ability to handle conflict, which paradoxically makes conflict less likely because you address small issues before they become big ones. You develop a reputation as someone who can be direct without being cruel, honest without being destructive. People actually appreciate clear, constructive communication, even when the topic is difficult, because it shows respect and investment in the relationship. Every relationship, personal or professional, will eventually face situations that require difficult conversations. The question isn't whether these situations will arise, it's whether you'll have the skills and courage to address them constructively when they do. Mastering this aspect of communication doesn't mean eliminating discomfort. It means being able to move through discomfort toward resolution and deeper understanding. But there's one more communication context that deserves special attention because it's increasingly dominant in modern life: digital communication. The rules change when you're communicating through screens and keyboards rather than face to face. Let's tackle that challenge next. Digital communication, mastering the modern medium. The rise of digital communication has fundamentally changed how we interact. Email, text messaging, social media, video calls. These channels now dominate both personal and professional communication, but the medium is not neutral. Communicating through digital channels creates unique challenges, opportunities, and risks that require specific awareness and skills. The most obvious challenge is the loss of nonverbal cues in text-based communication. When you're typing a message, you lose access to tone of voice, facial expressions, body language, all the elements that convey critical context and emotional information. This makes misinterpretation much more likely. A message you intend as neutral or businesslike might be perceived as cold or harsh. A joke you think is obviously humorous might be taken as serious or offensive. Research on digital communication has consistently shown that people systematically overestimate how accurately their tone and intent come across in text messages. You know what you meant when you typed it, so it seems obvious to you, but the recipient has to interpret black and white text without any of the contextual cues they'd have in person, and they often interpret very differently than you intended. This asymmetry creates countless unnecessary conflicts and misunderstandings. Someone reads an email as angry or dismissive when you were just trying to be brief. They interpret a delayed response as ignoring them when you were just busy. They take a message as criticism when you meant it as helpful feedback. The potential for miscommunication multiplies in digital context. The solution is deliberate clarity and explicit context. In text communication, you often need to state things that would be obvious in person. If you're offering feedback that could be perceived as critical, starting with "I want to offer some thoughts that I hope will be helpful" frames it positively. If you're asking for something but don't need an immediate response, saying "no rush on this" prevents the recipient from feeling pressured. You're essentially compensating for the lack of nonverbal cues with extraverbal clarity. Punctuation and formatting take on outsized importance in text communication because they're the only tools you have to convey tone and emphasis. A period can seem harsh where an exclamation point seems friendly. All caps reads as shouting. Strategic use of line breaks, bullet points, and bolding can make your message clearer and more digestible. These aren't frivolous stylistic choices, they're essential communication tools in text-based mediums. Emojis and emoticons, while sometimes dismissed as unprofessional or silly, serve a genuine communication function in digital context. They add emotional context that's absent from plain text. A simple smiley face can clarify that you're being lighthearted rather than serious. This doesn't mean you should fill professional emails with emojis, but judiciously used, they can prevent misunderstandings in contexts where they're culturally appropriate. The asynchronous nature of much digital communication creates its own challenges. When you send an email or text and don't get an immediate response, it's easy to start creating stories about why. They're ignoring you, they're angry, they don't care. Usually the reality is much more mundane. They're busy, they haven't checked their messages, they saw it but need time to formulate a response. Managing your own expectations about response time prevents unnecessary anxiety and conflict. Email, despite predictions of its death, remains the dominant communication channel, especially in professional context. But most people use it poorly. They write long, rambling messages that bury their point. They fail to use clear subject lines that help recipients prioritize. They send when they should call or meet face-to-face. They overuse reply all and create inbox clutter. Effective email communication follows principles similar to good verbal communication: clarity, conciseness, appropriate formality, and consideration of your audience. Your subject line should accurately describe the content and priority. Your opening should state your purpose clearly. The body should be organized logically, with the most important information first. Your close should specify any actions needed and timing. Research on email effectiveness has found that shorter emails get higher response rates and faster replies. If your email requires scrolling, it's probably too long. Consider whether a bullet-pointed summary might be clearer than paragraphs. Ask yourself whether you've included necessary information while cutting anything extraneous. Respect that reading email takes time and attention. Make that investment worthwhile by being efficient and clear. One common email pitfall is failing to consider tone carefully. Because you can't hear your voice or see your face, the words have to carry all the weight. What seems professionally direct to you might read as curt or rude to the recipient. Adding brief pleasantries, thanking people for their time or effort, and ending warmly rather than abruptly all help create a positive tone that prevents misinterpretation. That said, excessive politeness can also be problematic, especially for women and others who feel pressured to soften every message. Endless apologizing, just and sorry to bother you phrasing, and excessive hedging can undermine your authority and credibility. Finding the balance between respectful communication and confident assertion is an ongoing calibration based on context and relationship. Text messaging creates different expectations than email. It's generally assumed to be more immediate, more informal, and more conversational. What's appropriate in a text might be too casual for an email. What requires an email might be too formal or lengthy for a text. Understanding these medium-specific norms prevents awkwardness and miscommunication. The brevity that texting encourages can be both an advantage and a challenge. At its best, texting forces clarity and conciseness. At its worst, it leads to fragmentary communication, where important context gets lost. Knowing when to shift from text to a call or in-person conversation is an important judgment. Some topics are too complex or too sensitive for text. Video calls have become ubiquitous but come with their own communication challenges. The slight delay in transmission disrupts natural conversational rhythms, making it harder to pick up on subtle cues about when to talk. Looking at the camera versus looking at people's faces creates an awkward choice about eye contact. Technical issues introduce frustration and cognitive load that isn't present in face-to-face conversation. To communicate effectively on video, you need to adapt. Slightly exaggerating your nonverbal cues helps them register through the screen. Being more explicit about turn-taking prevents the awkward talking over each other moments. Checking your own video feed occasionally ensures you're positioned well and your expressions are visible. These adjustments compensate for the limitations of the medium. Social media adds another layer of complexity, particularly around audience. When you post something publicly or semi-publicly, you're often communicating simultaneously to multiple audiences with different relationships to you and different interpretations of your message. What's funny to your friends might be offensive to your coworkers. What's appropriate in one community might violate norms in another. The permanence and searchability of digital communication is another critical consideration. That angry email you fire off in the moment might resurface years later. That text conversation might be screenshot and shared. That video might be recorded without your knowledge. Digital communication creates a record that face-to-face conversation doesn't, and that record can have consequences long after the immediate interaction is over. This doesn't mean you should communicate with paranoia, constantly censoring yourself out of fear. It means being intentional and thoughtful, recognizing that digital communication lacks the privacy and ephemerality of in-person conversation. Before you send something, consider whether you'd be comfortable with it being seen by unintended audiences or becoming permanent record. One helpful practice is to pause before sending. For important or emotionally charged messages, draft your message but wait before sending it. Step away, do something else, and return to it later with fresh eyes. You'll often realize that your initial draft was too reactive, too harsh, or unnecessarily lengthy. That pause creates space for more thoughtful communication. Digital communication also enables new forms of miscommunication around availability and boundaries. The expectation that people should be constantly reachable, that messages should be answered immediately, creates pressure and anxiety. Setting and communicating boundaries around your availability is increasingly important for maintaining well-being and preventing burnout. This might mean establishing that you don't check email outside work hours, or that texts after a certain time are for emergencies only, or that you batch your message responses rather than being constantly interrupted. These boundaries aren't rude, they're healthy, and when you model them, you give others permission to do the same. The proliferation of communication channels also creates choice fatigue and confusion. Should this be an email or a text, a call or a video chat, a direct message or a public post? There's no universal right answer, but thinking strategically about which medium best serves your purpose prevents communication missteps. Generally, choose text-based mediums for conveying information, creating a record, or allowing asynchronous response. Choose voice or video for nuanced discussions, emotionally sensitive topics, or rapid back-and-forth exchange. Choose in-person for high-stakes conversations, relationship building, or situations where nonverbal communication is critical. Cross-cultural digital communication adds another layer of complexity. Written communication eliminates accents and many cultural markers, but cultural differences in directness, formality, and communication style remain. What's acceptably informal in one culture might be disrespectfully casual in another. Emojis and humor don't always translate across cultural boundaries. Time zones create practical challenges for synchronous communication. One often overlooked aspect of digital communication is the importance of presence and focus. When you're on a video call while checking email, texting while in a meeting, or scrolling social media while watching a presentation, you're not fully present. This divided attention shows, and it undermines communication quality just as surely as it would in person. Giving your full attention in digital context requires discipline. because distractions are literally at your fingertips. Closing unnecessary windows, silencing notifications, and physically removing temptations like phones helps maintain the focus that effective communication requires. When you're digitally present with someone, truly focused on the interaction, the quality of communication approaches what's possible in person. Digital communication has also created new possibilities for thoughtfulness and connection. You can send a message to check in on someone who's going through a hard time. You can share resources or information that helps someone. You can maintain relationships across distance that wouldn't be possible otherwise. Used well, digital tools enhance human connection rather than replacing it. The key is intentionality. Digital communication defaults to quick, reactive, and often careless exchanges. Consciously choosing to communicate thoughtfully, even in quick digital mediums, creates moments of real connection and understanding. This might mean taking the extra minute to craft a clear message. It might mean choosing a voice call over text when tone matters. It might mean adding a personal touch that shows you're thinking of the actual human on the other end. Ultimately, digital communication requires all the same fundamental skills as face-to-face communication: clarity, conciseness, empathy, active listening, awareness of audience, just adapted and applied to the constraints and affordances of different mediums. The better you are at core communication skills, the more easily you can adapt them across whatever channels you're using. As digital communication continues to evolve, with new platforms and technologies constantly emerging, the fundamentals remain constant. No matter what medium you're using, you're still trying to create understanding, build connection, exchange information, and navigate the complex territory of human interaction. The tools change, the underlying dynamics remain. Which brings us to the final piece. How do you actually get better at all of this? How do you take everything we've covered and turn it into improved communication in your daily life? That's what we need to address to bring this all together. Practice and refinement, making communication a daily discipline. You now have a comprehensive understanding of what makes communication effective: the nonverbal elements, active listening, clarity and conciseness, emotional intelligence, strategic questioning, body language mastery, navigating difficult conversations, and adapting to digital mediums. But knowledge alone doesn't improve your communication. Only practice does. Only the daily discipline of applying what you know, observing the results, adjusting your approach, and trying again. Communication is a skill, and like any skill, it develops through deliberate practice over time. You don't read a book about playing piano and become a pianist. You don't watch a video about swimming and know how to swim. You have to actually do the thing, repeatedly, with attention to what's working and what's not, gradually refining your technique through countless iterations. The beautiful thing about communication is that you get to practice every single day. Every conversation is an opportunity. Every text message, every email, every meeting, every interaction with friends, family, colleagues, strangers. You're either practicing good communication or practicing bad communication, but you're always practicing something. This means the first step in improving is simply paying attention. Start noticing your communication patterns. How do you typically start conversations? Do you interrupt people or let them finish their thoughts? What's your body language like when you're listening? How do you handle disagreement? Do you ask questions or make statements? Are you clear and concise, or do you ramble? You can't improve what you're not aware of. So begin by observing yourself without judgment. Not to beat yourself up about everything you're doing wrong, but to understand your current baseline. What are your habits, your defaults, your tendencies? This self-awareness is the foundation for intentional improvement. Getting external feedback is invaluable because you have blind spots that self-observation can't reveal. Ask trusted friends, family members, or colleagues for honest input about your communication. What do you do well? Where could you improve? Are there habits you're unaware of that undermine your effectiveness? This requires great psychological safety for people to be honest with you. If you get defensive or dismissive when someone offers feedback, they won't give you honest input again. But if you receive it with genuine curiosity and appreciation, if you actually use it to improve rather than just asking for show, people will help you develop this critical skill. Video recording yourself can be eye-opening, though initially uncomfortable. Whether it's recording a presentation, saving a video call, or even just filming yourself practicing, watching yourself communicate reveals patterns you can't see any other way. The facial expressions you didn't realize you were making, the filler words you use constantly, the nervous habits that distract from your message. Yes, it's awkward to watch yourself. Everyone feels that way. but the discomfort is worth it for the insights you gain. You don't have to share the recordings with anyone. Just use them as a tool for self-awareness and improvement. Once you've identified patterns you want to change, focus on one thing at a time. Trying to fix everything simultaneously is overwhelming and ineffective. Pick one specific aspect of your communication to work on. Maybe this week you're going to practice leading with your main point. Maybe next week you're focusing on asking better questions. Maybe the following week you're working on not interrupting. When you focus on one element, you can actually pay attention to it and measure your progress. You can catch yourself in the moment when you're about to fall into old patterns and consciously choose a new behavior. Over time, that new behavior becomes more automatic, and you can shift focus to improving another element. Create opportunities for deliberate practice beyond your natural daily interactions. Join a group like Toastmasters if public speaking is a priority. Take an improv class to develop spontaneous communication skills. Practice active listening with a friend, where you take turns sharing and listening without interruption. Role-play difficult conversations before you have them for real. These structured practice opportunities let you work on specific skills in environments where the stakes are lower than real-world interactions. You can try new techniques, fail safely, and get feedback that helps you adjust before applying what you've learned in situations that really matter. Reading about communication, taking courses, consuming content about these topics, all of that can be helpful, but only if you actually apply what you learn. Don't just accumulate knowledge, use it. After reading about active listening techniques, actually practice them in your next conversation. After learning about I statements, use them the next time you need to address an issue with someone. Keep a communication journal where you reflect on your interactions. What went well? What would you do differently? What did you learn about yourself or the other person? What new technique did you try and how did it work? This regular reflection helps consolidate learning and identify patterns you might otherwise miss. Be patient with yourself. Changing ingrained communication patterns takes time. You'll have setbacks where you fall back into old habits. You'll have moments where you try something new and it doesn't work as planned. This is normal. It's part of the learning process. What matters is that you keep practicing, keep adjusting, keep improving. Celebrate small wins. Notice when you successfully used a new technique or when a conversation went better than similar ones in the past. Acknowledge your progress, however incremental. This positive reinforcement helps sustain the motivation to continue developing your skills. Surround yourself with good communicators when possible. We learn communication largely through modeling. When you spend time with people who communicate effectively, you naturally pick up some of their techniques and approaches. Pay attention to how skilled communicators handle different situations. What do they do that works? How can you adapt their approaches to your own style? Remember that improvement isn't linear. You won't get better in a steady upward trajectory. You'll have periods of rapid growth and periods where you plateau. You might even feel like you're regressing when you're actually just trying more challenging things. Trust the process and maintain the discipline of practice even when progress feels slow. Context matters enormously in communication effectiveness. What works in one situation might not work in another. What's effective with one person might fall flat with another. Part of developing communication skill is learning when to use which techniques, reading situations accurately, and adapting your approach rather than rigidly applying formulas. This requires experience. The more different communication contexts you navigate, the better you become at quickly assessing what a situation requires and flexibly adjusting your style. It's like a musician learning to play different genres or an athlete learning to adapt their technique to different conditions. The fundamentals remain constant, but the application varies. Technology can be both a tool and a hindrance in communication development. Apps that help you practice meditation or mindfulness can improve your presence and focus in conversations. Recording and transcription tools can help you analyze your communication patterns, but excessive technology use can also degrade your attention span and reduce opportunities for face-to-face practice. Use technology strategically to support your development rather than letting it fragment your attention and erode your skills. Teaching others about communication is one of the most powerful ways to deepen your own understanding and skill. When you have to articulate principles clearly enough for someone else to understand and apply them, your own grasp of those principles strengthens. When you observe others practicing and provide feedback, you develop your ability to notice what works and what doesn't. Consider mentoring, coaching, or simply sharing what you're learning with interested friends or colleagues. Set specific communication goals for yourself, not vague aspirations like be a better communicator, but concrete objectives like Have one difficult conversation I've been avoiding by the end of this month, or practice active listening in every one on one meeting this week, or reduce my email response time to under 24 hours. Specific goals give you clear targets to aim for and ways to measure progress. Review your goals regularly and adjust them as you improve. Once you've built a habit of active listening, set a new goal around a different aspect of communication. Continuous improvement means always working at the edge of your current capability rather than staying comfortable in what you already do well. Build accountability into your development process. Share your communication goals with someone you trust and check in with them regularly about your progress. This external accountability helps maintain consistency and provides another source of feedback and support. Understand that communication skill development is lifelong. You will never reach a point where you have nothing left to learn or improve. Even the most skilled communicators continually refine their abilities, adapt to new contexts, and work on their areas of weakness. This isn't discouraging, it's liberating. It means you can always get better, no matter where you're starting from. The compound effect of small improvements over time is extraordinary. A tiny bit better at listening each day, slightly clearer messages each week, incrementally more skillful at difficult conversations each month. These small gains accumulate into dramatic improvements over years. Someone who commits to getting just 1% better at communication each week will transform their capabilities over the course of a year. Don't underestimate the ripple effects of improving your communication. As you become more skilled, your relationships deepen, your professional opportunities expand, your conflicts decrease, your influence grows. People seek you out because they know you'll listen, understand, and communicate clearly. The investment you make in this skill pays dividends across every dimension of your life. Finally, remember that effective communication serves something larger than itself. It's not just about being good at a skill. It's about connecting with other human beings, understanding and being understood, collaborating to solve problems, navigating differences without destroying relationships, and participating meaningfully in the communities and organizations you're part of. When you communicate well, you make other people's lives easier and better. You reduce confusion and frustration. You create clarity where there was ambiguity. You build bridges where there were walls. You help people feel heard, valued, and understood. This isn't a small thing. In a world full of noise, distraction, and division, clear and empathetic communication is a genuine contribution to everyone you interact with. So take what you've learned here and use it. Don't let this be just information you consume and forget. Actually practice these skills. Pay attention to your communication, get feedback, try new approaches, fail, learn, adjust, and improve. Make communication development a priority in your life because it's genuinely one of the highest leverage skills you can develop. The conversations you have today will be different than the conversations you have a month from now if you practice. The relationships you build going forward will be richer and more authentic. The conflicts you navigate will be less damaging and more productive. The opportunities that come your way will multiply because people recognize and value your ability to communicate effectively. This starts with a choice. The choice to no longer accept mediocre communication as inevitable. The choice to invest the effort to develop this crucial skill. The choice to be intentional about how you listen, how you speak, how you write, and how you connect with others. Make that choice, then make it again tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that. Every conversation is practice. Every interaction is an opportunity. Every moment of communication is a chance to do it a little bit better than you did before. That's all it takes. Just a little bit better, consistently over time. And before you know it, you're not the same communicator you were when you started. You're someone people actually want to talk to. Someone who can navigate complexity, build bridges, and create understanding, even in difficult circumstances. That's the power of mastering communication. That's what these few minutes have given you. Not just information, but a roadmap for genuine transformation. Now it's on you to walk the path, to take these principles and make them real through practice, attention, and commitment. Your communication today determines the quality of your relationships, your career trajectory, your ability to influence and contribute. Don't leave something this important to chance. Develop it deliberately. Practice it consistently. Improve it continuously. The conversations you need to have are waiting. The connections you want to build are possible. The impact you hope to make depends on your ability to communicate effectively. You have the knowledge now. All that remains is the doing. So go do it. Start today. Have that difficult conversation. Listen more deeply to someone you care about. Craft that message with more clarity. Pay attention to your body language. Ask better questions. Manage your emotions more skillfully. Adapt to your audience more thoughtfully. Do this every day. Not perfectly, but better. Not without mistakes, but with learning. Not instantly, but progressively. That's how communication mastery is built. One conversation, one interaction, one conscious choice at a time. And if you found this valuable, if you learned something that will actually improve how you communicate, do one more thing. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Because the world needs better communicators, we need people who can listen, understand, articulate clearly, navigate tension skillfully, and build genuine connection across differences. You can be one of those people. You already are to some degree. Now become even better. Your future self and everyone you communicate with going forward will thank you for the investment you make in this essential skill, starting right now